There's something incredibly raw and heartbreaking about watching a family fall apart, especially when it's a family that's supposed to be a tight knit unit, bound together by love and faith. But behind the seemingly perfect facade of the Brown family on Sister Wives, there's an emotional storm brewing that's been long ignored. The pandemic hit everyone hard, but for the Browns, it exposed deeper fractures in their relationships that many of us never expected to see. At the center of it all is Cody Brown, the patriarch whose emotional distance and controversial decisions are leaving a trail of devastation in his wake. Meanwhile, Janelle, the second wife, finds herself stuck in the middle, fighting for the well being of her children, battling her own mental health struggles, and trying to hold her family together in the face of emotional neglect. And then there's Garrison and Gabriel, two of Janelle's children, who have been silently suffering from the fallout, their mental health unraveling as their father remains absent, and their mother struggles to keep things from falling apart. As we peel back the layers of this complex family dynamic, we're confronted with some uncomfortable truths. Mental health struggles, emotional neglect, and a lack of parental support have taken a massive toll on this family. And while we watch Cody's cold, controlling approach to parenting unfold on screen, we see Janelle desperately trying to step in where he won't. But can one parent really hold it all together when the other refuses to show up emotionally? Stick around, because what's about to unfold is not just family drama. It's a harsh reality check on the price of neglect and the emotional toll it takes on everyone involved. I'm Oliva, and welcome to TLC's Sister Wives Secret. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and let me know your thoughts as we dive deep into the emotional roller coaster of the Brown family. You won't want to miss what's coming next. When the pandemic hit, it wasn't just the world that felt the weight of isolation. Janelle Brown found herself sinking into a deep, familiar despair. Already struggling with feelings of depression, the lockdowns and quarantine only amplified her sense of loneliness. The physical separation from her family members, especially her children, who were now scattered across different states, created a growing emotional void. In Sister Wives, we've seen Janelle express her struggles before, but the pandemic brought everything to a head. It wasn't just about isolation for Janelle, it was about the toll it was taking on her kids. She was especially concerned about Garrison, who seemed to be spiraling during this time. As the eldest son, Garrison had always been someone Janelle tried to keep a close watch on. But now, with the pandemic forcing them into lockdown, she could feel something deeper was happening. He wasn't just physically distant. Emotionally, he was withdrawing, and it worried her. She could see the signs, the loneliness, the isolation, and it scared her, especially because she'd been down that road herself. However, as we've seen in multiple seasons of Sister Wives, Cody was indifferent to these emotional struggles. While Janelle was trying to connect with her children and provide them the stability they needed, Cody seemed more concerned with maintaining control over his ever-changing family dynamic. Janelle, who had faced depression and isolation before, particularly when they moved from Utah to Las Vegas and later to Flagstaff, was aware of what was happening, but Cody just couldn't or wouldn't see it. And with the emotional distance between them, this would become one of the darkest chapters in the Brown family's saga. As the emotional cracks within the Brown family deepened, one thing became painfully clear. Cody Brown's parenting style wasn't just distant, it was almost absent. And it wasn't just a one-time issue. His failure to emotionally connect with his children, especially his own flesh and blood, revealed a pattern that could no longer be ignored. Take Garrison, for instance. Janelle had been noticing his emotional distress for a while, particularly during the pandemic, when his mental health seemed to take a turn for the worse. He was struggling with loneliness, feeling isolated, and by all appearances was quietly suffering. Yet when Janelle tried to raise her concerns with Cody, his reaction was dismissive at best. Instead of recognizing the severity of Garrison's mental struggles, Cody's response was almost cold, as if he couldn't, or didn't want to, acknowledge the emotional depth of the situation. Janelle's efforts to protect her children, to create a sense of stability in their home, were constantly met with resistance from Cody. Where Janelle saw a son in crisis, Cody saw only an inconvenience, one more person he couldn't control. This wasn't just about Garrison. The emotional distance Cody showed extended to his other children, too, particularly Aurora, Janelle's daughter, who was experiencing panic attacks. Now, these aren't the kind of things you can just brush aside, and yet Cody seemed to do just that. His response to Aurora's panic attacks wasn't one of concern or support. It was simply to acknowledge them with little emotional engagement. It wasn't that Cody didn't care, but it was more like he didn't know how to care. He was always more concerned with his own image, his power within the family, and his need to control every situation. And this need for control had an ironic consequence. It kept him emotionally distant from the people who needed him the most, his children. On the other hand, Janelle was a mother who felt every ounce of pain her kids went through. She wasn't just a mother in name. She was present in their emotional lives. She noticed the small signs, the things others may have brushed off. She was in tune with her children's needs and fears, especially during the isolation brought on by the pandemic. But while Janelle struggled with her own mental health issues, her battles with depression, anxiety, and the overwhelming loneliness of being stuck between two different realities, Cody's response was one of complete emotional detachment. It's clear that Janelle's emotional involvement stood in stark contrast to Cody's need for control. While she worked tirelessly to maintain a semblance of normalcy and emotional support for her kids, Cody seemed more interested in keeping up appearances, in managing the family in a way that allowed him to be the one in charge. This divide between them, emotionally and as parents, created a chasm within their family. Cody's lack of consistency, his inability to engage when things got tough, only deepened the rift. His children were left to navigate their emotional struggles alone, while Janelle tried to be the emotional anchor for them all. And as we saw in later episodes, it wasn't just about the kids' mental health. Cody's inconsistency showed itself in other areas too, from how he handled finances to how he approached each wife's individual needs. Yet, the most heartbreaking aspect was how this all trickled down to the kids, especially Garrison and Gabriel, who, through no fault of their own, were being ignored, dismissed, or worst of all, made to feel like their emotional well-being didn't matter. Cody's emotional unavailability wasn't just a personal flaw. It was a family tragedy waiting to unfold. As the pandemic dragged on, Garrison's emotional state worsened. It wasn't just the isolation or the uncertainty of the world around him. There was a deeper, more painful struggle that he couldn't put into words, and Janelle, always in tune with her children, noticed the signs early. He wasn't the same. His typical youthful energy was replaced with a quiet sadness, and his once open demeanor became withdrawn. It was clear to Janelle that something was wrong, but what was more concerning was that Garrison wasn't speaking up. As a mother, Janelle knew that silence didn't always mean everything was fine. Instead, it was often the opposite, an emotional cry for help masked behind a facade. In an effort to get through to Cody, Janelle reached out, desperate for support. She expressed her concerns about Garrison's mental health, pointing out that he was struggling, feeling increasingly lonely and isolated. This wasn't just a phase. Janelle could sense that her son was in real emotional distress. But instead of receiving the understanding and support she desperately needed, Janelle's efforts were met with resistance. Cody, as always, seemed to shut her down, brushing aside the concerns and insisting that Garrison's issues were just part of growing up. For Janelle, this was emotionally draining. She wasn't just battling her own depression, her own feelings of isolation. She was shouldering the burden of ensuring her children's mental health was looked after in an environment that didn't always value emotional well-being. Cody's reluctance to engage meant that Janelle was left to navigate this complicated emotional landscape on her own, with no real backup from the man who was supposed to be her partner in this journey. She was the emotional backbone of the family, carrying the weight of everyone's mental health, especially during such a stressful time. And while Cody played his part in providing for the family financially, Janelle was the one doing the heavy lifting when it came to emotional support, and it was taking its toll. It wasn't just about managing the home, it was about managing her children's mental states while trying to hold on to her own. But with no help and no understanding from Cody, Janelle was left feeling more isolated than ever. Amid the emotional turmoil brewing within the Brown family, there was another layer of neglect that went largely unnoticed by the public eye. the family's handling of healthcare and finances. This was especially apparent when it came to Isabel's scoliosis surgery, a situation that, by all accounts, could have been managed better had Cody Brown made the right decisions from the start. Scoliosis is a progressive condition, and Isabel had been suffering from daily, excruciating pain for months. Yet, despite knowing about the severity of her condition, it took a staggering 9 months for Christine to finally secure the insurance necessary for the surgery. 9 months of pain and suffering for a teenager who should have had access to medical care much sooner. Why the delay? Cody's response was nothing short of baffling. Instead of taking immediate action to ensure Isabel's medical needs were met, he delayed the process, placing the burden of financial responsibility on Christine. It wasn't like they didn't have the means to act sooner. The Browns were well established, financially stable, and had the resources to take care of their children's medical needs. So, why the holdup? Cody's refusal to use family funds to cover the surgery, despite the fact that they could easily afford it, painted a troubling picture of his priorities. He preferred to wait until Isabel turned 18 so she could obtain insurance independently, even though her pain was becoming unbearable. This decision reflected a deeper issue within the family, a pattern of avoidance. Instead of addressing the problem head on, Cody opted for inaction, letting the issue drag on and forcing Christine to pick up the slack. In essence, the Browns' wealth didn't translate into proper financial planning or sensible decisions regarding their children's health. While they lived in large homes, drove multiple vehicles, and were able to travel, the fundamental need for health insurance, a basic requirement for any family, was neglected. Cody's handling of this situation revealed a glaring inconsistency in his parenting style. While he expected emotional support and control over every other aspect of the family's life, when it came to medical needs, he chose to avoid the issue altogether, leaving his children to suffer. The emotional neglect and inconsistent parenting within the Brown family have taken a serious toll over the years, and the consequences of Cody's actions, or lack thereof, are undeniable. While the pandemic may have been an isolating experience for many families, for the Browns, it exposed deeper fractures that had been simmering for quite some time. Cody's failure to prioritize the emotional health and connection within his family has caused irreparable damage, particularly to his relationships with his children and even his wives. The emotional scars left behind are evident not just in their struggles, but in the growing sense of abandonment and disillusionment felt by many members of the family. Cody's dismissiveness towards the emotional needs of his children, especially Garrison, along with his refusal to address serious health concerns, has created a rift in the family that can't be easily healed. His need for control and his inability to provide emotional support when it was most needed has left his children feeling emotionally unsupported and even disconnected from him. Garrison, who was already struggling emotionally during the pandemic, was left to cope with his distress on his own, without the guidance or care of the very person who should have been there for him. The same pattern can be seen with other children, like Isabel, who suffered for months before receiving the medical attention she so desperately needed. On the other hand, Janelle, Christine, and Mary have consistently stepped up as emotional supports, even when Cody withdrew. While Cody's attention was elsewhere, these wives found themselves taking on the emotional labor of the family, ensuring their children were cared for, mentally and emotionally. They were the ones who provided stability, love, and support during the darkest moments, but it came at a cost to their own well-being. Imagine how different things could have been if Cody had been more emotionally present, if he had invested in the mental health of his children and the emotional needs of his wives. With more awareness and genuine parental involvement, the Brown family might have been able to weather their challenges together. But unfortunately, the lack of emotional connection, coupled with Cody's detachment, has led to deep divisions that continue to shape their lives in ways that will be hard to undo. At the end of the day, the Brown family's struggles reflect a harsh truth. Emotional neglect, especially from a father and partner, can fracture even the strongest of families. And without consistent effort, understanding, and love, the damage becomes harder to fix with each passing day.